Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for January 5th of 2024. Um, Starting off with our severe weather outlooks, we're not really going to be going over the threat for severe thunderstorms, especially for today, because overall the threat for severe thunderstorms for today isn't really all that concerning to me. However, there are going to be some other things I'm going to be covering in this forecast, such as the winter weather outlooks we are expected to see impact the New England corridor over the weekend, as well as the possibility of significant severe thunderstorms later this week, and then also the possibility of severe thunderstorms tomorrow on the 6th. So as of today, for the 5th, we do have a marginal threat for the Gulf Coast states along the Gulf of Mexico there, the coast. Overall, this isn't really too concerning. Instability is extremely weak, so there's not really a lot there to fuel the possibility for severe thunderstorms. But we do have a 2% tornado risk and a 5% wind risk, but we don't really have all that much of a hail risk. I'm not going to be covering this in today's forecast, but again, it is there. For tomorrow, we do have a marginal threat for a very good portion of the Florida Peninsula. We do have a 2% tornado risk, 5% wind risk, but we don't really have all that much of a hail risk. I may cover this in a forecast tomorrow, however, I may also not. It really all depends. And then for day three outlook, not really a lot going on, but this is where it really does get concerning because for our day four and day five outlooks, we do have at least a 15% issued, 15% for both day four and day five, which is a slight risk. Um, this day four outlook for the 8th was issued as far back as day 7. So if the SPC does have high enough confidence and the models are trending enough and there's enough confidence with the models, then the SPC may be able to issue a severe weather outlook as far back as day 7 or day 8. However, that is mostly rare because models do like to vary a lot, especially that far out. So whenever the SPC does get the chance to issue a severe weather outlook that far out, it is heavily monitored because it does mean that the SPC is seeing quite a bit of trends with the models that is making things a little bit concerning. So this day 4 outlook was issued as far out as day 7, so there was a ton of confidence with this forecast, and we could see at least a slight risk for severe thunderstorms um, on Monday, as well as for day 5, which was recently added around day 6. Um, for the ninth, for North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, into Alabama and the Florida Peninsula. So this is fairly concerning, and I will go over this in today's forecast, as well as I may have the possibility of going live on these days. It depends on if the models continue to trend and the confidence in the forecast, and if the risk is high enough that I deem it a high enough threat to uh, go live for it. It really all depends. So I may or may not go live for this, but again, this is something that could be fairly concerning in this outlook. It does mention a few strong tornadoes, so it is something to definitely be watching out for. If you do live in any of the areas that could potentially be impacted by this, you definitely want to be staying weather alert. And again, I will have forecasts out on this. I may potentially go live. Taking a look at some of our WPC outlooks, I'm not really going to spend too long on this. For our first 3 days, for today, we do have a marginal threat due to some of the rainfall that we are seeing in the Gulf Coast areas of the Gulf of Mexico along the Gulf Coast. And then for tomorrow, we are expected to see a marginal threat for flash flooding for near North Carolina up across the eastern coast up to southern Rhode Island, southern Connecticut, and southern Massachusetts. And then for our day 3 outlook, we currently don't really have anything issued as far as flash flooding. However, for our day 5 outlook, we will have to watch this because we do have a small moderate threat issued for very close proximity to the New York City region as well as into northern New Jersey. So we will have to watch that as flash flooding could possibly be significant on those days. As far as winter weather, for today, we are expected to see quite a bit of heavy snowfall for the mountains in the Rockies, extending from Washington into California, as well as parts of northern Idaho. And then we are also expected to see some heavy snow for northern regions of Minnesota. Um, Potentially down into Wisconsin and the upper peninsula of Michigan, as well as the primary concern being this thing in the New England corridor, where we could see quite a bit of heavy snow. This is expected to continue northward across the rest of the New England corridor. This is going to be the second thing that is going to be covered in today's forecast, because this is going to lead to some significant impacts as far as winter weather is concerned across the New England corridor. For tomorrow, you can see a huge increase in the area for heavy snowfall for the New England corridor due to that winter storm that we are expected to see push through there, as well as quite a bit of heavy snow for the Rocky Mountains region. And then for our day 3 outlook, we are expected to see quite a bit of heavy snow for the Central Plains. Taking a look at our weather models, I'm going to be starting off with our 500 millibars, and I'm going to be starting off with a threat for severe thunderstorms on the 8th and the 9th. I'm going to be going over it in depth, like our usual daily forecast. I'm going to be going fairly in depth. Something I do want to note is I am going to be using the GFS models, which aren't really the best or most accurate as far as in-depth severe weather forecasts, because they can be a little iffy and they can exaggerate some things. So do keep that in mind as we do look at these models. I am using the GFS models for this outlook. However, again, models have been fairly consistent with what they have been forecasting, so that's why we have this day 4 and day 5 outlook to begin with. So starting off with our trough progression, we are going to see the beginning of this trough come out of the northwest here around the 6th. And then as that moves across the Rockies, it's going to move into New Mexico and the southern central plains and begin Lee cyclone genesis on the leeward side of the Rocky Mountains in the high plains. And then that is going to continue to move into the southeast here, and it is going to undergo its classic trough advection, classic trough progression, where it takes on that more negative tilt. Overall, the how negative the tilt of that negative tilt is, it's not really negative. You see the axis of the trough is still fairly up and down. It's not completely negative. It is fairly neutral, but it is somewhat negative, and that is going to increase the 500 millibar jet streak upwards of 120 to 130 miles per hour. So we are expected to see a very, very strong 500 millibar jet streak across this region, and that's going to really help support the possibility for severe thunderstorms. We can also take a look at our low-level jet. You can see around the time the low-level jet is expected to increase, it is expected to a fairly strong strength here, upwards of 90 miles per hour, getting close to 100 miles per hour, but it's probably going to stay around 90 miles per hour. So as that low-level jet increases on the day of the threat for severe thunderstorms, that is going to increase the possibility of severe thunderstorms as it feeds into the area of concern, as well as enhance the low-level curvature in the photographs. As you can see, tons of curvature in the trough here, and with its shear strength, we are expected to see a ton of directional shear with this. And even on the 500 millibars previously, we did have a very, very prominent veering in the winds. So we are expected to see a ton of directional shear with the event on the 8th and the 9th. And as that low level jet increases, that is also going to, again, increase the curvature in the low levels of that photograph and support the possibility of a very good tornado risk on the 8th. Taking a look at our 200 millibars, you can see where our low level or low pressure is. You can see that negative tilt much more prominently here, especially compared to our 500 millibars. But I'm primarily looking at our 200 millibars because I want to take a look at the defluence in the exit region of the trough. So in the exit region of the trough, you can see the isobars and how they are spreading in the southern part of the exit region, almost completely eastward, a little bit more towards the north, but almost completely eastward. But towards more inward towards the center of the trough, almost completely northward. In fact, it does look like this wind vector in particular is pointing a little bit towards the west. So you can really tell how our ISO or wind vectors and our isobars are really spreading apart here. And why this is so important is because that basically creates a void in the atmosphere. And the atmosphere doesn't like voids because it's a gas and it will try to reach equilibrium in any chance it can. Or any way it can. And how it will do that to fill that void is we'll take air from the lower levels of the atmosphere and it will rise upward, and that's how we get wide scale lift. And that's why the fluence in our upper levels of the atmosphere is so important. And you can see it is really putting a fire hose at the deep southeast. So we are definitely expected to see quite a bit of lifting motions, quite a bit of lift in the deep southeast to support the possibility of severe thunderstorms. Taking a look at our dew points, you can see that we are expected to have quite a bit of ample moisture. It's going to be fairly moderate, but it is definitely going to be ample to support the possibility of instability and ample instability across the deep southeast. And of course, we will have to look at temperatures. But you can see how a lot of the moisture is going to be pulled out of the Gulf of Mexico with the warm air and moisture advection out of the south, and that's where we're going to be seeing all of our fuel coming from to support the possibility of severe thunderstorms, because we can't just take a look at the jet stream and not take a look at the fuel. And we are going to be seeing a ton of moisture and heat be pulled out of the Gulf of Mexico, um, and that is really what's going to be fueling the possibility of severe thunderstorms. And as that warm front progresses eastward and introduces that warm sector and pulls that warm sector eastward, and as that cold front impinges on that warm sector as it pushes eastward, it is going to be using up the moisture, heat, and instability that's in the warm sector to fuel the severe thunderstorms along the cold front. And you can see the warm sector is really pushing quite far inland, especially compared to today, where we have that surface flow riding more towards the coast. So the warm sector is having a hard time staying ashore. But you can see our low pressure system, our surface flow, being quite far inland. So we are definitely expected to see quite a bit of moisture, quite a bit of heat, and quite a bit of instability being pulled out of the Gulf of Mexico quite far inland to fuel the possibility of severe thunderstorms. And again, of course, we will have to look at temperatures for our instability. Taking a look at our temperatures, you can see that we are expected to have some quite ample heat across this region. Our heat may be a little bit more on the weaker side. It is going to be warm, but it's not going to be too warm. We are expected to see temperatures that are going to be staying around the 60s, possibly getting close to the 70s, but mostly staying around the 60s. It's not really the best for strong, ample instability, but it should definitely allow for ample instability nonetheless, especially with the warm air advection that we see or will see constantly pouring out of the Gulf of Mexico. We should definitely see instability build ashore, and that should definitely fuel the possibility of severe thunderstorms. And you can see the sharpness in that cold front as well. We are definitely seeing a very sharp cold front, and it's going to be quite strong and should definitely trigger the severe thunderstorms. Again, overall, our temperature's not really the best, but it should definitely support the possibility of some ample instability to support the severe thunderstorms. Taking a look at our cumulative instability, you can see that we are going to have quite a bit of instability, especially along the coast, especially further out to sea in the Gulf of Mexico, where we could see upwards of 300 joules per kilogram of instability. But ashore, we're going to see some fairly moderate to weak instability due to those overall weaker end temperatures being more towards the 60s. Again, it's not really the best, but should definitely be ample to support the possibility of some ample instability. And the coast is going to be a really big player in this because that's where we are going to be getting all of our instability, all of our moisture, and all of our heat from is going to be flowing in from the Gulf of Mexico. So the closer proximity you are to the coast, the better instability and the better moisture you are going to have in that warm sector because uh, that's where you have the majority of our heat and moisture coming from. Overall, our instability is going to be dropping quite quickly as it moves inland. We are expected to see Cape values are going to be staying mostly around the triple digits as far inland as Mississippi, but around the coastal regions of Louisiana, we could see upwards of 1,600, 1,500. So, especially along the coast, we are expected to see some quite ample instability to support the possibility of severe thunderstorms. Taking a look at our storm relative felicity is basically the directional shear that we are seeing, and it's the type of shear that is needed to support the possibility of tornadoes. Um, of course, you do need the speed shear to separate the updraft and the downdraft, but overall, when it comes to tornadoes, storm relative felicity and directional shear is the biggest player in the possibility for tornadoes. So along the cold front and associated with that low pressure system and surface low, and from that low level jet, we are seeing an insane amount of storm relative felicity and directional shear. With further inland, not really going to be affected by the tornado risk. Directional shear getting upwards of 1,600 meters squared a second squared with an absolute beast of a hodograph on our simulated soundings. So again, we are seeing an absolute ton amount of directional shear, especially further inland, due to that low level jet and trough. Um, but where we are expected to see our instability, you can still see um, very strong storm relative felicity, very strong directional shear, and that is definitely going to be supporting the possibility of tornadoes, especially with that overall weaker end shear. We aren't really going to see a crazy big threat for we're not going to see a crazy threat for tornadoes when the 8th and ninth do roll around because of overall lower end instability, but with the amount of directional shear and the amount of instability being fairly moderate, we should definitely see the possibility of tornadoes on the 8th and the ninth. We can also take a look at our composite parameters for our energy helicity index. What this basically does is it does take a look at the entire picture, everything that's going on in the atmosphere to give us the best idea for tornadoes. Energy being instability and helicity being a directional shear. And again, that does culminate together to give us the possibility for tornadoes regardless of frontal systems or triggering factors. This is just the combination of instability and directional shear. So if a cold front does move through an area of strong energy elasticity index, that is probably going to be a tornado risk. So where we do have that cold front moving through, and where we do have our ample instability in our warm sector close to the coast, we are seeing some fairly strong energy elasticity index values along the coast, especially further out to sea. 7.0, that is quite big, and you see quite a bit of instability. And very good curvature in the low levels of the photograph. However, do not take into account, completely ignore this because this is out in the sea here, and it's not really all that much of a concern. However, ashore, we are seeing some fairly strong energy elasticity index values that are going to be fairly indicative of a tornado risk on the 8th. You can see um, forecasted instability upwards of one, or sorry, that's not a very good color, upwards of 1,663, most unstable 791. Even if it is in the triple digits, still going to be supportive of a tornado risk. Overall, again, not really the best instability, but you can see one beast of a hodograph here, and probable hazard type tornado. So again, everything is culminating together to support the possibility for tornadoes. And if you haven't figured it out already, instability is going to be a little bit more of an issue as far as the risk for tornadoes on the 8th and the ninth, because instability is going to be a little bit more on the weaker side, especially with our temperatures being in the 60s. But again, uh, what the models are indicating is that it should pull through to give us a quite big tornado risk, but it shouldn't be too big. Now we are going to be taking a look at our Ritter Omega models, but we're also going to be taking a look at the snowstorm that we are expected to see impact the New England corridor as well as the Ohio River Valley. So let's start off with our winter weather radar, or our composite reflectivity, or basically our precipitation type. It's basically composite reflectivity, but it shows us what's going to be falling from the sky, whether it's rain, snow, or if it's freezing rain or sleet. So we can see our much more higher quality models on our NAM 3 kilometers, NAM 3 kilometer CONUS models. Um, you can see that a system is going to be moving across the New England corridor through the eastern half of the United States. As it does push into the Appalachian Mountains region, we are expected to see quite a bit of freezing rain, and ice is going to be a pretty big threat across the Appalachian Mountains. If you do live in some of the more rural areas, more isolated areas in the Appalachian Mountains, definitely make sure you are checking the roads before you're driving on them, because it is going to be fairly icy this weekend, as all that snow falls across the Appalachian Mountains. And then as that system does move into the a little bit more flat areas, but some of the more rocky regions as well across the New England corridor, we are expected to see a ton of snow, upwards of 30 dBz snowfall. That is very heavy, quite a lot of snowfall falling at one time if it's getting up to 30 dBz. That is up to heavy rain level if it was rain. So it's bound to be quite heavy if it's snow. And as that does move up along the New England corridor, that is going to be bringing a ton of snowfall. But we can also take a look at the timing for when this is expected to impact. We are expected to see those more icy impacts start across the Appalachian region around the 6th, and then as that system does move more northward into a much more colder environment, we are expected to see a lot of that rain turn to snow, and it is going to begin across Maryland around the 6th, push into Pennsylvania around 2 p.m. on the 6th, and into New York around 7 p.m. in the afternoon on the 6th, and into Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, the smaller states, as well as into Maine, into the more overnight hours, into the very early morning hours of the 7th. And again, this isn't going to be without its hazards. We are expected to see travel impacts from this as well. We are expected to see roads become quite hazardous. So I do not recommend traveling if you do know that you are going to be impacted by this winter storm, as visibility is expected to be quite low, as well as roads are going to be hazardous, as they could possibly be covered with either snow or ice. So again, I do not recommend traveling if you know you are going to be impacted by this winter storm. Um, but if you do have to travel in this winter storm, um, please definitely make sure you are taking the necessary precautions and staying weather alert if you do have to travel in this system. Taking a look at our total snowfall models and how much snow we are expected to see accumulate across the New England corridor. Again, 30 dBz for snow is quite large. That is what you would expect for heavy rain, as mentioned previously. So if it is snow, that is going to be some quite heavy snow, and that is going to accumulate quite a lot across the New England corridor. As you can see, widespread and confident values from the NAM 3 kilometer CONUS models. Um, Potentially getting upwards of 10 to 16 inches across the New England corridor, with the possibility of an isolated 20 somewhere across New York in some of the more rocky regions. Again, we are expected to see a ton of snow accumulate across the New England corridor because of this system. It is going to be quite big, potentially over a foot of snow in some regions across the New England corridor, and potentially even more widespread regions. Instead of it being more isolated, we could potentially see a foot of snow across a very widespread region of the New England corridor. So that is something you definitely want to be watching out for if you live in any of the areas that could potentially be impacted by this system. And then to finish it off, I'm going to be taking a look at the accretion for our freezing rain or another word for ice. Basically, it's basically whenever rain passes through a small warm boundary, melts, and then falls into a area of below freezing temperatures. Below that area of warmer air, and it freezes as ice because it can't really fall down as snow. Um, so across Appalachian regions, we are expected to see quite a bit of ice accumulation on the ground as well as roads due to that freezing rain. We are expected to see potentially anywhere from anywhere from zero point 0.2 inches upwards of zero point 0.4 to zero point 0.5 inches of ice accumulation, or another words for how thick the ice is expected to be. Thank goodness that we aren't seeing upwards of an inch of ice accumulation across the Appalachian regions, and it should stay less than an inch. However, that doesn't mean that you aren't going to have travel hazards when it comes to ice. In freezing rain, even if it is less than an inch and it may not sound like a lot, you are definitely going to have the hazards with slippery roads and everything that does come with ice, especially across the Appalachian regions where you do have those ravines and places that your vehicle could fall into. And when you're traveling into some of those more mountainous roads, the freezing rain and ice is a huge threat. Even if it was flat like out in Kansas, freezing rain and ice would still be a threat. However, it is significantly more of a threat when it's in the Appalachians and it's in more mountainous regions because you have those areas that your car could fall into. So I highly do not recommend traveling if you or having to travel through the Appalachian regions. I highly recommend finding another route, as it is going to be quite dangerous trying to get through the Appalachian region. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas that I covered for the weekend or severe weather upcoming, please stay weather alert for the time being and watch for updates. If you notice anything might have been wrong with this forecast or you'd like to make a suggestion, um, please leave a comment. Two other channels that I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather, Weather Watcher. The links to their channels will be in the description. One Nation Weather is growing extremely fast. He's already halfway from 1,000 subscribers to 2,000 subscribers. He's currently sitting at 1,000, 1.44K. That is quite a lot, and he is growing immensely. So, uh, shout out to Project Gladiator for the amazing work he's done with weather forecasting. And hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast. Another thing is that I do want your feedback as far as how good you think this forecast was as far as length. I know that this forecast was probably a little bit more on the lengthy side, and I want your feedback based on how long it is going to be. However, I don't want to sacrifice the length of the video, it being under 10 minutes, for the quality, the speed I'm talking, and how in depth I am going. I want it to be high quality. I want it to be in depth, and I want it to be going over everything that it can and has to. I don't want it to be short enough for you guys for it to not be grueling to sit through. I know that this may be a little bit grueling to sit through, so that's why I want your feedback as far as how good you think this forecast was, as far as the length of time of the video. Um, because again, I want it to be in depth and I want it to be high quality, um, but that does come with a sacrifice for how long the video is. So again, I do want your feedback on that, and hopefully I should be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.